I'm going to get right down to the heart of this story. I'm going to tell you a story about a man on this evening. His name is Marcellus Williams. He was executed by the state of Missouri for a 1998 murder he said he didn't commit. Marcellus Williams had always maintained that he had nothing to do with the stabbing death of a former St. Louis Post Dispatch reporter. State and federal courts rejected numerous last minute requests to halt the execution and review the case. All right, the U.S. Supreme Court, Missouri Supreme Court, and Governor Mike Parson declined to stop the execution of Marcellus Williams. So let's talk about his story on tonight. Before I tell you his story, I'm going to tell you a story about a young man who was falsely accused of a brutal crime that he didn't commit. And this is a true story. This is not something that's made up. A young woman was adopted into a very religious family, one of those devoutly religious families where you couldn't have freedom, you couldn't have friends, you couldn't go anywhere. All you had to do was go to church and do what they told you to do. She was prohibited from even having a boyfriend or going to a party. So she decided one evening she was going to go to this party with her boyfriend. She lied to her parents and told her that she was going to go out with one of her friends. So she went to the party. The hour grew late, and she knew that once she got home, she was going to have to answer for her lateness. So this is what this young woman decided to do. She ripped her clothes. She scratched her face up. She found some glass and she cut herself. Then she went to the police station and they saw her tattered clothes, her scarred up face, and the blood running down her body. And they asked her what was wrong with her. She said she had just been raped by a black man. So this is a Caucasian young girl who did this. What she did next will astound you. Back in those days, they had sketch artists. They probably still use them. And the sketch artist drew an accurate depiction of a man that she never met in her life. And they went out and they found this young man. Of course, they went through several black young men, and they went out and they found him. And they charged him with rape in the first degree. He was given life without parole. 20 years went by, and this young woman stuck to her story. The district attorney believed her, the prosecutor believed her, the police believed her, and the judge believed her. This young man was imprisoned by this time for 20 years, maintaining his innocence, but nobody believed him. One evening, this young girl went into a church, and she had a change of heart and decided to become born again, become one of the born again Christians. And she told her pastor that she had to tell him something, that she held a deep secret. So 20 years later, she told her pastor the truth and asked her pastor, what should she do? He said, you have to tell the truth, even if it means that you go to prison for telling the truth, because you cannot, in all good conscience, call yourself a Christian knowing that you have a man in prison for life for a crime he did not commit. She told the police, they didn't believe her. She told the district attorney, they didn't believe her. She even told the judge who presided over the trial. No one believed her. The young man came up with a brilliant idea because he had petitioned the governor of the state that he lived in for a pardon or a commuted sentence. And this is what he proposed. He proposed that they conduct a DNA test, which they never did. And he told the governor outright, and this really happened, that if the DNA test came back and proved that he was indeed the rapist, that he would continue to stay in prison without parole. But if in fact DNA cleared him, that they would have to drop all charges and let him go. The young girl went to the prison. Now she's a woman. She went to the prison, special permission, and apologized to him for what she had done. It was a moving moment. And by the way, it was the Innocence Project in his state that undertook this case. And they do not like to take cases unless they can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the person was telling the truth. So the lie detector test wasn't enough for him. Now they offered the DNA test. I know what I'm talking about. Criminal justice major. I'm not looking into this camera and just spewing stuff like Trump does, just out of his mind. The DNA test came back and proved indeed that there had been semen inside her, but it was not his. The semen belonged to her then boyfriend. So you can imagine the judge is upset. The district attorney is upset. The police who tried to force a confession out of him, they're all upset now because they had this innocent young black man locked up in prison for life for a crime he did not commit. They had to let him go. They tried to give him a commuted sentence. No, that wasn't the deal. The deal was you give him a full pardon. He sued the state and he won. So don't tell me, because I'm getting ready to get into this article of this brother Marcellus Williams right here. So don't tell me that innocent people are not framed every day in this country and sent to prison for crimes that they didn't commit. It happens every single day. Police lie. District attorneys lie. Prosecutors lie. They frame people. Judges lie. They frame people every day for crimes they did not commit. And they commit crimes and then put the blame on others. So give me that garbage about one bad apple. There's some rotten people within law enforcement. I have people in my family, and I lecture them sternly. They don't want to hear it. I told them, if you go along with the wrong, you're just as bad as the person that committed the atrocity against an innocent person, and you're going to answer for it, whether you believe it or not. Now I'm getting to the case of Marcellus Williams. So according to the St. Louis Public Radio, Marcellus Williams had always maintained that he had nothing to do with the stabbing death of a former St. Louis Post-Dispatch reporter. State and federal courts rejected numerous last-minute requests to halt the execution and review the case. A St. Louis man has been put to death for a 1998 murder that advocates say he did not commit. Marcellus Williams died by injection Tuesday evening, shortly after the U.S. Supreme Court rejected several last-minute requests to halt the execution. The state Supreme Court allowed the execution to go forward on Monday, the same day that Governor Mike Parson declined to grant clemency. He's probably a Republican. In a final statement, Williams, who became a devout Muslim during his time in prison, gave, quote, all praise to Allah in every situation, close quote. Trecca Rojo Bushnell, executive director of the Midwest Innocence Project, said in a statement, tonight we all bear witness to Missouri's grotesque exercise of state power. Let it not be in vain. This should never happen, and we must not let it continue. Close quote. Quote, close quote. Parsons said he hoped the execution would give finality to a case that has languished for decades. He said the legal proceedings had re-victimized the family of Felicia Gale, a former St. Louis Dispatch reporter who was fatally stabbed in her University City home in August 1998. Gale's family, while believing Williams was guilty of her killing, had come to oppose his execution. Williams had always maintained he had nothing to do with the murder of Gail. Police would find some of Gail's possessions in a car that belonged to Williams, and he pawned a laptop belonging to her husband. But no forensic evidence linked DNA, hair, or fingerprints ever tied him to the scene. He was convicted largely on the testimony of a former girlfriend, Laura Asaro, and a jailhouse informant. No, he's not an informant, he's a snitch. Just tell it the way it is. They come up with all these pretty terms. You are a snitch, named Henry Cole. If you have sons in prison, tell them to stay off the telephones and stop talking about their case, and tell them to stop talking to their so-called friends who are just trying to get their behinds out of prison, and they'll be the very ones sitting up in court being a snitch and testifying against them. They'll make up any lie to save their own hide. In 2017, Asaro called an activist based in Kansas City reportedly to recant her statements against Williams, but Asaro's mother would allegedly not allow her to finish the call. Asaro and Cole have both since died. St. Louis County prosecuting attorney Wesley Bell believed Williams was innocent of the crime and filed a motion to vacate the conviction in January. So if the state prosecutor believed that he was innocent and filed a motion to vacate the conviction in January, he initially focused on 3 experts who said unknown DNA found on the handle of the knife used as the murder weapon could not be from Williams. But further testing revealed that the DNA most likely belonged to 2 former employees of the prosecutor's office. Why weren't they interrogated? Why weren't they interviewed? I'm all for justice for victims, 1,000,000%. But make sure you got the right person if somebody's going to go to prison. Because when people go down that tyrannical road of no return, there's no going back once the die has been cast. But further testing revealed that the DNA most likely belonged to 2 former employees of the prosecutor's office. One would later admit in court that he touched the knife without gloves multiple times ahead of trial. While those findings meant the evidence had been contaminated, it also no longer pointed to an unknown killer. In an effort to save Williams' life, his attorneys and Bell's office reached an agreement in which Williams would plead no contest to the murder charge in exchange for a life sentence. When State Attorney General Andrew Bailey objected, St. Louis City Council Judge Bruce Hilton ended the deal and proceeded with a hearing on the motion to vacate. With their proof of an unknown killer eliminated, Bell's office and attorneys for Williams pivoted to arguing that the handling of the knife represented a, quote, bad faith failure to preserve evidence, close quote. That's what happened almost like in the O.J. Simpson case. Remember, the cops rode around with the evidence in the car for like 3 or 6 months instead of turning it into the evidence lab? And that was one of the major points of contention in the O.J. Simpson trial. How could you have evidence that possibly could have been contaminated by cops be used against the defendant? They also asserted claims that prosecutors had prevented a juror from serving solely because he was black. Well, that means there was an all-white jury that convicted him, in violation of the U.S. Supreme Court's 1986 ruling in Baston versus Kentucky. But both Hilton and the state Supreme Court agreed that the clear and convincing evidence required under state law governing motions to vacate a conviction was lacking. I'm going to tell you a story about 2 young men from Duke University before I end this broadcast. Despite nearly a quarter century of litigation in both state and federal courts, There is no credible evidence of actual innocence or any showing of a constitutional error undermining confidence in the original judgment. Judge Zell Fisher wrote in Monday's unanimous state Supreme Court opinion. Okay, whatever. Let me tell you a story about two young Caucasian young men who were falsely accused. Now, I'm telling the story about two young white young men who were falsely accused of raping a black stripper. These two young men belonged to Duke University. They were attending. They were part of a lacrosse team, and they both came from wealthy backgrounds. Have you ever heard of the former disgraced district attorney called Nifon? I'll tell you about him in a minute. Well, let me tell you about him now. Nifon was up for re-election to become the district attorney again. And basically, he had no apparent agenda to win the re-election. So a young black stripper was at this party. And the young men admitted they were at the party, but they said they did not interact with her. But she engaged with sexual intercourse from multiple men at the party, but she didn't get paid for her services. She then went to the police and accused the two young white university students of raping her. Nifon, without any scintilla of evidence whatsoever, charged these two young men with rape. And his pledge was that if he was re-elected as the district attorney, he would make sure that they went to prison for life. Now, this young black stripper is sticking to her story that she was raped by these two young men. Here's where the story takes a drastic turn. He got re-elected based upon this promise. The black community is in outrage. They want justice for this young black stripper who was supposedly raped by these two young white men. They were convicted. They were sent to prison. But this is where the twist comes in. Their parents was not buying the story of the district attorney because they knew he was corrupt. Nifon stuck to his lies, and she stuck to her lies. Both of their parents hired independent investigators to conduct DNA tests, background checks, and everything else. And they found out that the young woman had lied. She had to admit that she lied. The DNA test came back and proved that these two young white stellar University, Kentucky, Duke University students were in fact innocent. And they never committed those crimes. Nifon was brought up on prosecutorial misconduct charges. They held a public hearing. I remember, I watched it. He was disbarred from ever practicing law again, thrown out of office. The families sued Duke University for expelling them and sued the state, I think it was as well. So I just gave you two cases. I'm not talking about the Marcellus Williams case, because I'm just reading what was written. But where I have dispute with, why would he have been willing to plead no contest for an exchange of life in prison without parole? When you're innocent, you're innocent. You don't plead anything. Not no contests, not no contendere, nothing. You maintain your innocence. In America, a judicial system must dispense justice with credibility, with honesty, with integrity. instead of just dealing with assumption. You're welcome, Richard. Instead of just dealing with assumption. Bad men and women must be punished. But innocent people must not go to prison for crimes they never committed. And that's why I'm a law student and I'm becoming an attorney. And fight for criminal justice reform as a criminal justice reform advocate. I'm not becoming a lawyer to make money. I'm becoming one to help those who cannot help themselves and to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves and to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. And you want to know what compelled me to go down this road? Because I was falsely accused and I was sent to prison for 10 long years. And the people that did it never expected me to come out. But the day of reckoning is coming. Believe that. And if it took for me to go to prison to find my true calling in life, then so be it. But those who did the damage will ultimately pay the price for their just deeds. So remember this broadcast on tonight. Please subscribe to Tyrone Bowman Live, because I will be covering stories in a fair and decent way. I don't care what color you are. If you falsely accuse somebody of something, you're getting grind up. Deal with truth. Stop telling lies. And those who are on the benches, judge judiciously with honor and integrity, because you're playing with people's lives. And one day, every judge will stand before the judge of all creation. And they're going to have to answer for every case that they adjudicated. And for every person they wrongly sent to prison. There's no such thing. You're just going to live and die and don't give an account for this life. All right, until the next broadcast, thank you all for watching. Never surrender. Never quit.